right, phase 2, posture breakdown. Remember, our chores regenerate our body, get it back to homeostasis, and then our work potentiates athleticism. First, we need to figure this out so that we can progress into this. The exercises are only possible if you're able to access ranges of motion and then build trust with your mind and body so that it feels safe accessing those ranges of motion. Now, postural restoration is all about building the architecture so that then you can progress into movement and add strength and power to that system. But think of your body as a building. When you are building the foundation and setting up the structure of that building, you cannot have things out of alignment. Because if you do, as you start putting more things into the building, the weight and the load is going to increase, putting more stress on those beams that are out of alignment, and that building is coming down. The only difference is with our bodies, we don't just collapse into the ground. We figure out different ways to hold ourselves up, which is a short-term solution, but in the long term, we have chronic joint pain, muscular imbalances, and inefficient movement. So you do these things first, that will potentiate your ability to run faster, jump higher, all doing it pain-free. Now the spine, the ribs, and the pelvis are your true core, and these are the three things that we are going to try to calibrate in this postural restoration, because to me, that is your foundation, and also these are the things that have the most variability. And when something is off in one of these three things, the body tends to feel it. So when you look at the spine, the rib cage, and the pelvis, all of these things can rotate independently of one another. The ribs can go up and down on the left side and on the right side. They can shift right to left on the right side and the left side. And they can also rotate independent of the spine and the pelvis. The spine is able to also rotate, and then the pelvis can move up and down. It can tilt left to right. It can shift side to side, and also both sides of the pelvis can rotate, shift, and tilt independently of one another. For me, most problems in the body come back to some sort of unalignment in these three areas. Now, whether that's a shift, a tilt, or a rotation in the spine or the ribs or the pelvis is going to be very specific, and I don't have time or the expertise to explain all of those things. But what I can explain is the importance of knowing this so that we can actually buy into these posture exercises. Because when we put the skeletal structure in the correct positions and then we breathe into it so that it becomes our default settings, you will feel the changes right away. Again, if your body cannot access relative motion in different positions, then your body's going to have to lock up. For example, when you are sprinting and there's supposed to be some hip extension on this side with some hip flexion on this side, right? If I want to drive my left knee up, my left pelvis must flex a little bit up, and then my right pelvis needs to drive hip extension. If all of these variables are not easily accessible, then my body has to work harder to perform certain movements, and that is what causes imbalance in the muscles. If my right hip is stuck because of the way I sit or stand, that is going to throw off how that entire system works. So the foundation of this is standing and sitting posture. Now in phase 2, we will talk about how the tongue, the neck, the diaphragm, and the pelvic floor are all connected. And with each breath, we are supposed to be pressurizing that system almost as if it was a tight rope. And when we pressurize this system, the other muscles that are supposed to be movers and rotators can relax and potentiate for better movement. If this system is not pressurized and is flimsy, then other muscles, our synergist muscles, have to work to brace the core when in reality they're supposed to be the ones moving our body through space. That is how people get chronically tight hips. And if this is your problem, you can do all the stretching in the world and it won't work unless you fix this issue. And notice how a pressurized core does not mean the six-pack abs. It is all the deep core muscles that connect the nasal passage and the pelvic floor, creating a cylinder of strength and stability to protect our vital organs and move our body through space. Now let's get into the phase 2 posture chores. We will work on this mewing while we inhale through the nose, fill up our ribs 360 degrees, and then exhale with the side abs all the way out through the mouth. And we will also keep some of our phase 1 favorites, which will continue helping with our pelvic tilt and the anterior and posterior compression that we are holding because of poor posture. Next, we will get into a left sideline knee-to-knee exercise, which will help with external rotation on the right side of our body while firing that right glute, and then internal rotation on the left side of our body, which will help with our adductors and how they connect to our glute. Then we'll have a TFL inhibition exercise, because a lot of times, because of this seated position that we're locked into so much, our TFL, which is the hip flexor on almost the outside of the body that connects to the IT band, is usually going to be pretty overworked. And again, this is a synergist muscle in a lot of our movements, but because of our postural dysfunction, it usually works a lot harder than it has to, and that is just going to chronically pull on your IT band. So if you have tight IT bands, no matter how much you foam roll them, if you have a tight TFL, that tension is always going to be there. We want our glute max and glute med working through positions and shutting off this TFL. Then we'll get into a 90-90 hip shift, which will help our left side specifically with the hamstrings, glutes, and the adductors. We will have a lat dorsi release because a lot of the weight room exercises work on shortening and strengthening this lat dorsi. But the problem is in most of our movements, we need to create length to potentiate a whip action in that muscle specifically. And if that's tight, it's going to slow down our sprinting mechanics, and it's probably going to cause some dysfunction elsewhere in the body. And then for clients, we're going to go over specifically what is missing in your posture photos and what needs to be addressed and what posture chores we need to lock into throughout the next few weeks.